Reading is probably the most impactful and the most important thing that we as humans can do for ourselves, for our mental and our physical health. Okay, maybe not the physical part, because other than you constantly turning pages, I don't expect reading to grow your forearms or anything, but you get the point. Reading is beneficial, and with the world being as messed up as it is, I figured we'd sit down and talk about various books I've read and see if they interest you. So I'm going to talk to you about books I've read, what I thought about them, and what you can take away from them. So, let us begin. Alright, first book I want to start off with is The Catcher in the Rye. Controversial as this book is, I actually like this book. In fact, it's probably my favorite book that I ever read in high school. Now, for the record, let me just say that, yeah, I'm aware of this book being very problematic and it supposedly being the reason why John Lennon died, but that aside, I figured that this book is really my favorite because it's probably had the most impact on me compared to any other literary book that I've ever read. Now, granted, the reason why I love this book is because it's relatable. Face it, you're a kid who's growing up and hates the fact that he or she is growing up because you're realizing how much being an adult is a mess. You think to yourself that when you're a kid, you can't do anything because you're so young, but when you're an adult, you can do whatever you want, and then you see what adults are. This mix of sadness and grief and frustration, and you start to ignore all of it. You start to think, no, that's not what adulting is all about. I want to be better than that. That is basically the idea of this book. It follows a dude named Holden Caulfield who, after getting expelled from his prep school, basically just wanders around New York. There's literally no plot. There's no fighting. There's no action. There's no like, oh my god, dude's being chased in New York like by some serial killer. No, it's just a dude who just goes to New York and just messes around. That's it. Nothing more, nothing crazy. So what makes this book special is just the character. Because honestly, without Holden Caulfield, this book would not be as special as it is today. So why is it that this book is as problematic as it is? Well, plain and simple, people hate Holden. I mean, seriously, there are so many instances where he just gets annoyed by the simplest thing, and he makes a big deal about it. But the fact isn't the fact that he's just, like, complaining about it. He makes it seem like it's society's problem, when in reality, it's just a disturbance that he himself does not like. For example, it's like, he goes to a train and is annoyed by some woman who puts a suitcase on the top of the shelf. I honestly, it's been a while, but he just gets annoyed by that, and then he makes a big deal about how, like, God, don't you hate it when people do that? I'm like, dude, it just happened. It's not a problem that has a concurrence, but he makes it a big deal. And the more I read about it, the more I'm like, yeah, this Holden character is really something. But he is unique, he is compelling, and he is relatable. And in fact, the reason why people hate Holden is because there's a Holden inside of all of us that we refuse to acknowledge. So whether or not you like this book or not, you can't deny that there is a large level of relatability in the context of what this book is talking about. It's really showcasing the negative effects of alienation, grief, and coming out of age. Hence why it is probably one of the most successful, if not the most popular, coming out of age story. It really shows how Holden, a 16-year-old kid, is having a hard time figuring out that he himself is going to grow up one day. Back in 1951, this book was released, and ever since its release, it's been banned throughout various schools and libraries. In fact, it's so banned I couldn't even find this version on Audible. But what makes The Catcher in the Rye such a unique book is its various impacts and themes that stem from raw portrayal, adolescence alienation, rebellion, and angst. It's talking about various forms of alienation where Holden becomes an icon for teens feeling disconnected from society. There are things such as cultural touchstones and psychological debts, such as PTSD, depression, and really just the idea of coming out of age. It's given this legacy because it's showing teenagers struggling to become adults, either because they don't like to become this responsible figure in society, or they just simply don't want to grow up. They don't want the responsibility of becoming an adult. But The Catcher in the Rye is such a taboo book because it's spreading the wrong message that you're not supposed to take responsibility. You should have fun and, be reckless and wild and have no ambition whatsoever. In fact, the book doesn't really offer a very unique message to better improve yourself. I mean, the main impact with this story is the connection between Holden and his younger sister, Phoebe. See, Holden really admires Phoebe. She's everything he wants to be. She's young, she's innocent, and doesn't really have a care for the world, whereas Holden has to sort of apply himself in a world filled with what he calls quote-unquote phonies. And with this, it really gives this dark association that, of course, Holden himself doesn't really want to live to society's expectations. He's not really submitting himself, but he isn't really complying with the rules either. And this is a recipe for disaster, essentially showcasing Holden's disembodiment, but also lack of any integrity whatsoever. What makes Holden such a unique character is how he's a symbol of rebellion, simply opposing these formalities that society has put on people. It's a symbol of youthful defiance against a hypothetical world. So yeah, that's The Catcher in the Rye. I'd rate it about 7 out of 10. Reading it was fun. It wasn't, underwhelming or anything. It actually had a level of enjoyability, but again, it still has a hard time leaving a good impact on people. In fact, it probably changed people for the worse. It created the whole jock trope, in my opinion. But this book frames rebellion as grief. Essentially, it shows Holden trying to forget about the fact that he has mental health problems, and this isn't really much of a spoiler, but in the context of the book, his younger brother died, and he wasn't there for him when he died, and it has essentially affected his mental health all throughout the story. And it's him trying to let go of that grief, or at least try to understand it. And again, it's wobbly at times, but still, there's a very coherent story that talks about Holden struggling to become an adult. The reason why it's called The Catcher in the Rye in the first place, it's simply this idea that Holden has built up in his mind where I can't stop myself from becoming an adult, but maybe I can stop other children from becoming an adult. Like, being in a rye field and, hoping that kids don't fall off the cliff. So I want to be that catcher in the rye. It's a weird sort of allegory. It's a weird story. It's a weird concept, but it does reflect the human nature of not wanting to grow up, essentially. Crime and Punishment. This book, I actually loved reading this book. If you know anything about redemption arcs, you probably know Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but if anybody has a really good redemption arc, it's Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment, written by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Everybody tells me, every psychologist, from Jordan Peterson to probably just Jordan Peterson, tells me that I should read Dostoevsky to understand human psychology and just overall human behavior as a whole. So I was like, screw it, I'll read it. And the first book that really caught my eye was Crime and Punishment. In fact, I think it's his most popular book. But anyways, it's about a guy named Raskolnikov who is a student who's living in abstract poverty in St. Petersburg, and he decides he wants to murder a pawnbroker to just earn some money. And so he thinks that him killing this pawnbroker, who is an old woman, is justified because she's old and she's crazy and she's, a hag. So essentially, in his mind, he's like, there's no purpose for this woman here. I'm doing her a service by killing her. And my God, it is one of the most insane psychological books that I've ever read personally, because it really shows the paranoia that goes into not only planning a murder, going into the murder, and the after effects of said murder. And my God, seeing Raskolnikov basically lose it is insane. But here's the thing, right? You have a hard time rooting for Raskolnikov. You sort of feel the sense of relatability Raskolnikov is in, but the more you get to know him as a character, he's quite literally, as simplest as I can explain it, very self-centered and basically gives off Walter White vibes. I mean, I'm serious. There's literally nothing about this character that is likable in the first half. He's like, my God, he's so self-centered and selfish. It's crazy, right? But throughout the novel, he's experiencing various forms of guilt and remorse because of the murder, and usually it's because he's seeing how the murder has affected his relationship with not just himself, but with the people that he loves and admires, his mom, his sister, and his lover. And essentially, this book is showing you how, despite all the frustrations that Raskolnikov goes through through committing the murder and the after effects of committing the murder, he wants to find a way to sort of redeem himself and sort of liberate himself from his guilt and his crimes, essentially. So it's really a story that dives into psychological torment, paranoia, and just overall the guilt of doing a crime of any kind. And so throughout the novel, Raskolnikov is trying to rationalize his actions, he's trying to be justified, but he's also just trying to make amends with his past mistakes. His consciousness doesn't really allow him to be the man he thought he was. He realizes he kind of has to drop his ego and find the truth within himself. So it gets into some religious aspects of redemption and whatnot, and it's very beautifully showcased. But Raskolnikov as a character, the change he goes through is very unique, it's very subtle, and it's very, I wouldn't say slow, because it really does take it, although yes, it takes its time, you see it evolve, surely, but evidently. Now, I read this book in jury duty, and my God, it was such a long book. It's literally like 600, yeah, almost 600 pages. I read about 500 of them in jury duty. That's how long jury duty was. Anyways, besides the point, this novel is a really good redemption arc story. How do you take a character who basically, like I said, has Walter White vibes, and I won't spoil Breaking Bad for you, but you take a character like Walter White, who most people say is irredeemable because of his ego, and how do you redeem him? Well, I think this book answers it. You allow the people around your inner circle to show you the right thing. I mean, for crying out loud, I think part of the reason why Walter transforms into Heisenberg is because the people around him disrespect him. Whereas in Raskolnikov, he's been blessed with people who genuinely want the best for him and have basically turned him into the man that he ends up becoming towards the end of the novel. I won't spoil it, but trust me when I tell you that if you want to see a man change from worse to good, this is the novel you want to read. It showcases what a redemption arc really does to a man. Not just physically, but psychologically. So yeah, I give this book 9 out of 10, honestly. Back in 1865, Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment primarily to investigate the psychological impacts of radical ideologies such as nihilism. He uses Raskolnikov to warn against violating moral law and embracing utilitarian ideas that justify evil for a perceived greater good. Some of the core themes and imagery in the novel delve into internal torment of guilt and the conflict between rational thought and human consciousness. Influenced by Dostoevsky's own harsh experiences, being in a Siberian prison, almost being executed, exiled, and in debt, he wanted to write a murder story from the killer's own perspective, depicting the inner agony, shame, and inevitable psychological punishment that comes with a violation of moral law, rather than focusing exclusively on exterior justice. One quote from the novel that basically sums up the themes and ideas in the story, told by Raskolnikov, he says, "I simply did it. I did the murder for myself alone. And whether I became a benefactor to others or spent my life like a spider catching men in my web and sucking the life out of men, I couldn't have cared at that moment. I wanted to find out then, and quickly, whether I was a louse like everyone else or a man, whether I can step over barriers or not, whether I'd have to stoop to pick up or not, whether I'm a trembling creature, whether I have the right to kill." Very long read, but when you get to the end, you'll feel satisfied that you did. I honestly walked away nearly crying, feeling grateful that I actually read this book because it showed me the humility of mankind. So, yeah, 9 out of 10, Crime and Punishment. All right, moving on. Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Okay, I gotta admit, I watched a video about Kafkaesque. It was just on a whim on YouTube. I was just searching up authors, and this book came into fruition. And let me just say that this book was amazing. I mean, granted, it has other stories in there as well, but I only read The Metamorphosis, and my God, I remember actually reading it in high school as well, and I never paid attention to what it actually meant, because it was literally just about a dude who turned into an insect. But when I started to read it for myself after watching that video, I started to realize the importance of what Kafka is trying to say, and that is, you, as a person, are useless to society unless you're worth something, or you bring worth in some way, shape, or form. So anyways, the story is about Gregor Samsa, who just out of nowhere wakes up into a giant insect. And the story offers no concise, no plan, no nothing about how he turned into an insect. Why? Because it doesn't matter. In fact, it's a metaphor for how sometimes society can see people as insects. And essentially, if there's one thing that's wrong with a person and it prohibits their ability to work, society flips out on them. And essentially, they give them this realization that they are useless and they berate them for not being able to provide for their families. Hence why Kafkaesque really is a very unique term. It's essentially learning the absurdities of life. Learning the absurdities of life through a society that has no respect for you, essentially. And that is the core theme of not just the Metamorphosis per se, but just Kafka as a whole. A lot of Kafka's stories revolve around characters who are put in the most absurd situations with no explanation, but with the simplest message of society does not care unless you provide something or you can explain yourself. The harshness of it is what society does in retaliation. Hence why this Kafkaesque aspect is a very unique concept overall. Now, with the Metamorphosis, it's basically showcasing Gregor, who, again, has become this insect, this bug, this vermin, as so to speak, and how because he's unable to work or communicate or even function, he becomes a burden to his family. Now, he tries not to think that way, but his family just outright say it. If Gregor never existed, none of these problems would have happened. And throughout the novel, it shows everything that Gregor has sacrificed for the sake of his family. For crying out loud, he's the only person that works in his family. He's the only person that saves up money for his family. He's the only person that genuinely listens to his family. But his family doesn't care. Why? Because of the fact that Gregor is basically bedridden because he's turned into a vermin and he can't work, and the family basically blames Gregor for existing. And because he exists, they can't do what they want to do. It's a very sad story, but it's a story that reflects, I don't want to be gender specific, but men in general who just have no purpose whatsoever, and their families feel frustrated by their lack of innovation, so to speak. It's like that one Chris Rock joke that he made, or not joke, but thing he said. He went on stage and he said that women, children, and dogs are loved unconditionally, whereas men are only loved conditionally, be it that they provide something for other people. And it's a sad reality, but that is basically the reality that is showcased in Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. Hence why even the idea of the vermin, because again, he doesn't go into detail about why or how Gregor turned into an insect, but it's a sort of a symbolic imagery that sometimes if something is wrong with you, whether you're missing an eyeball or missing a hand or you can't walk or you can't talk, society is going to condemn you as a person for not being able to work. Not all the time, but for the most part, if you're the man of the house or if you're the sole provider of the house and you can't provide anymore, you're screwed. That's how it is. And it's a very real story that happens to a lot of men across the world. And essentially that is why, toxic masculinity exists. It's sort of prying on men's loneliness and isolation and their inability to do what they are supposed to do as men. That it forces men to not know who they are, only what they can do in terms of a providing standpoint. So yeah, I mean, I like this book just because I relate to it on accounts. I mean, for crying out loud, Gregor is like the oldest brother. He has a younger sister who also goes through the same kind of mentality with, at first she really she loves Gregor and she tries to help him, but there are just times where even she's frustrated by his own presence, and this deeply affects Gregor as a character because it's like he cares about his younger sister, but because he's the older brother and he has to provide, since he can't do that anymore, his sister has lost all respect for him. It's sad, but again, it's like you can't help but fear that this could actually happen to me as the oldest kid, potentially not being able to provide, and that my family just hates me for it. It's sad, it's real, but it exposes us as humans how often we are tied to our productivity and the sort of obsessiveness of our productivity. The Metamorphosis, published back in 1915, is one of the most important and intriguing masterpieces of the 20th century. This novella, which narrates the life of Gregor Samsa's strange transformation, captivates readers with its odd concepts while also dwelling into deep alienation, remorse, and family dynamics. The Metamorphosis is still a common topic of literary studies and discussions. Its impact may be observed in the works of a wide range of authors from Albert Camus to Haruki Murakami, solidifying its status as a modest literary staple. Franz Kafka famously wrote this novel in about 3 weeks, showcasing his struggles with his family, specifically his father, and how he felt alienated and humiliated within them. See, the idea behind this story is the themes of isolation resonating deeply, and how Gregor, as an insect, symbolizes his alienation from the world he once lived in. The idea is that we as people have no self-worth unless we can provide society with anything valuable, and since Gregor is a bug, and he can't really do anything, his life is immediately deemed invaluable. So, very unique book, very weird imagery. I mean, a lot of it is honestly kind of repetitive in terms of what's happening in the book, because it's just describing what's happening and what's going on with Gregor in terms of A, his transformation, and B, just his overall environment that he's in now that he's become a bug and how it's transformed. It is slow, I'll admit, but when you get to the end, you're like, I can't help but fear that this may or may not happen to me. You know, that's all I can say about it. But I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10. Very unique book. Read it at least once. It's not super long, but it is definitely impactful. And when you start to understand it, you start to understand what getting a job really means in the eyes of the world. So, all right, I think I've talked a bit about various fiction books, and I think that for the most part, these are books that I think are classic literatures that you all could learn a thing or two about. But let me know what you think. I mean, honest to God, when I read these books, I was, for albeit a bit bored with a lot of them, because mind you, they're classic literatures and they tend to go on for hours, but for the most part, I definitely think there is something we can learn about the greats, the classics, that reflect society as a whole today, despite the fact that, you know, we are in a time where reading has been more important than ever since everybody's addicted to social media, myself included. But ever since I got rid of Instagram and just decided I wanted to just read some more, I've started to understand a great appreciation for the classics and just and how they relate to the modern times, for better or for worse. So if you ever get a chance, pick up these books, read them at least once, and tell me what you think in the comments below. But anyways, I'll see you all next time. Happy reading, everyone.